Hey everybody, how we all doing? I'm one more time, and we're here with another edition of the Game Boy-A-Thon, a series of streams where we play every Game Boy game ever released in North America, all 512, doing them four at a time. Thank you all for joining us today. Good to see you, J-Spot. Hope things are going well with you, buddy. And I'm very excited about today's stream. I'm excited because today is probably the first time that we're playing a game that not only people are going to recognize, but unabashedly think is good. And no, it's not Titus the Fox. But rather, we're actually going to be playing Kirby's Dream Land today. And I think that's probably the first game in this entire series that we've played where I think people are not only will recognize, but go, oh, that's actually a decent video game. But I think we have four games today that are going to be quite interesting regardless. We'll obviously be starting off with Titus the Fox, moving on to Kirby's Dream Land, NFL Quarterback Club right after that, and Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, kind of leading up the rear. So interesting set of games today, and all of them, some of them actually have some pretty unexpected things at all. J-Spot says, Titus could surprise you. They made the best Superman game after all. You know, very true. In the pantheon of... I don't think there's ever been a good Superman game. I'm just going to just throw that out here. Maybe Superman for the Atari 2600. That was good for the time. But yeah. Yeah, so originally we were going to be playing a Jeopardy game as part of this, but I sort of made the decision to move that. The reason being is that for this entire thing, we're supposed to at least have like one kind of compact, interesting thing to talk about with each game, right? The problem is I don't want to do things where like I talk the entire history or try to talk the entire history of like, say, a long-running TV show and pack it into like a 20-minute chunk. Nor do I want to like cut it up in four parts to be like, let's, talk about the first part of Jeopardy's history and then be like, okay, in 4 weeks, we'll continue this story when we play the next Jeopardy game. So there turns out there's 4 Jeopardy games for the Game Boy, which is, first off, too many Jeopardy games. So I'm going to basically do a stream at some point in the future where it's going to be all 4 Jeopardy games at once. And we'll just have like essentially a long podcast episode where we talk about the history of Jeopardy. And that's enough saying the word Jeopardy now. That's starting to lose meaning all of a sudden. But yeah, this is going to be a fun one today. So once again, we're going to be starting out with Titus the Fox. So let's go ahead and get that all sorted out here. So yeah, Titus the Fox to Marrakesh and back. This is developed by Titus France, which is where Titus is actually based. And published by Titus proper. Titus, also known as Titus Interactive as well, or Titus Software, kind of depends on the era of history and whatnot. And this was released in 1993. As you can see, 2-player game and whatnot. Apologies, I need to adjust one quick thing here. There we go. Otherwise, pretty standard feature set, easy and hard modes. The whole story of this game is that you're trying to rescue your girlfriend, whose name is Susie. Although I've also heard it translated as Foxy Fox, which I kind of appreciate a little bit more. Otherwise, kind of a simple 2-button game. Plays similar to like almost like Chip and Dale's in a way, that you collect items and you can pick them up and throw them in order to defeat enemies. This is a game that was first released on the Amiga. Back in, what was it, 91 or 92? And actually ended up being ported to quite a few different computers, including the Amstrad CPC, the Atari ST, and MS-DOS as well. To my knowledge, the Game Boy, and oddly enough, later the Game Boy Color versions, since we get a Game Boy Color re-release, were the only releases that were on non personal computer platforms. Oh, so that is just a wall there, apparently. Ooh, nice little crawling action you could do. So this game was developed and published by Titus Interactive, once again known as Titus Software, or sometimes simply Titus, depending on the era. Apparently, you have three hits you can spare in this game as well. It looks like. Titus is an interesting company in my mind. They're no longer in existence; they're now defunct. But back in the day, they were an example of a large-scale French publisher. It's kind of like Ubisoft in a way. Like Ubisoft is now. Ubisoft is about as old as Titus was, but Titus kind of had more early success. And was just kind of at one point just putting out so many video games. I do not understand what is going on here, but sure. So yeah, Titus is, I think, a underrated company as far as their importance in video game history. And I think for reasons that are probably not as obvious. And that's they help represent something that I think is underrepresented when people talk about video game history, which is the French video game scene. Like, Ubisoft obviously is very important, and I think people recognize them as a very important third-party publisher and developer. But French development of video games and their French influence on the video game scene has existed for a long time. It would usually be limited to things like the Amiga or other PCs that really didn't catch on too much here in the United States. Now, one day we're going to talk about Titus a little bit more in depth. But there are going to be 7 or so games that they've released for the Game Boy. And so we're going to choose one of those games to talk about them more in depth and whatnot, and talk about just French video game history in general. So what I want to do instead with this game, apparently weird fat French vagrants are immune to bowling balls. Honestly, a true fact, really. So what we're going to instead talk about is Titus the Fox himself, and just this game's really, really strange origins. So Titus the Fox, as you can guess from the name, is the mascot of Titus proper. He's a red fox who's predominantly featured in most iterations of their logo. Sometimes it's like a stylized cartoon, sometimes more of like a very angular face that you saw right at the start of this game. Okay, so what happens if I don't get there in time, video game? Am I just screwed now? Huh. So, this is the 90s, of course. So Titus, naturally, has to be rad. He is a leather jacket skateboarding fox who loves his girlfriend, who's, once again, his name's Susie. A fox who works for the magazine Fox and Locks. Now, the story goes that one day, she is kidnapped by an Arabian sheik and is taken to Morocco for reasons that are never adequately explained. As one does. And it's up to Titus to go to Marrakesh and rescue her. Hence why you're going to Marrakesh. Now, that in by itself should be really all you need to know about the game. Except it gets weirder. Because that's the international version of Titus the Fox. Now, the game as released in France, which is where Titus is located, is quite a bit different. Quite different. So, the domestic version of this game is known as, and I'm going to butcher this French pronunciation, so you'll have to forgive me for this, is called Le Gaffe, Les Adventures de Mokhtar, Volume 1, La Zubida. Once again, I am not a proficient French speaker at all, so anybody from France who happens to watch this later, I do apologize. So, this is a game that that name undoubtedly means nothing to anybody who's not from France. So to give you some context, this is a game that stars a popular French actor and comedian by the name of Vincent Roulier, or as he's better known as, Le Gaffe. So let's talk a little bit about Lagoth and why for some reason they decided to make a video game about him. So Lagoth, once again born as Vincent Rulli in 1959, started out his life in pretty rough shape. He was abandoned by his birth mother while he was still a baby, and he was in public assistance for about a year and a half before he was adopted by a chemical engineer and his wife. I don't have too much on his early life at all, but he did his required military service, and upon leaving worked as a mechanic before he decided to try his hand at comedy. Now, the story goes is that he was apparently quite terrible at comedy. He would routinely make mistakes and whatnot, and so he ended up getting the somewhat derisive nickname of Lagoth, or, you know, a man who makes gaffes, right? The gaff, I guess would be the direct translation. Now, he decided to roll with this, and he decided to take the stage name Lagoth. Now, this eventually ended up being shortened to Lagoth, L-A-G-A-F apostrophe. And the reason for that was because there was actually a fictional character by the name of Gaston Lagoth. And so, just to avoid any issues with names being similar, he was like, we'll just go ahead and change up we'll just make the name a little bit shorter and just go with that. So now, he's called Lagoth. So he performed in various French cabarets and whatnot throughout the 80s. But he didn't really get his big break until late 80s, after he ended up getting noticed by a few producers. And he also started to do essentially what were humorous songs. Kind of almost like Weird Al in the way, except instead of them being song parodies, they're just original songs he did. Now, one of these songs was called Beau les Waspassen. That was released in 1990. And it ended up being a huge hit for him. It spent 11 weeks at #1 on the French, essentially the French music charts. And so after that, he ended up following this up with another song. And this song was called La Zobida. Now, La Zobida, which is also part of the name of the French version of this game, is also a very popular song of his, or at least at one point was a very popular song of his. Also spent 11 weeks at #1 on the French charts, and it was released in 1991. Now, this song basically depicts Lagoth dressed as a North African immigrant, and it tells the story of how this North African immigrant, whose name is Mokhtar, basically rescues his girlfriend, whose name is Zobida, after her family refuses to let her go to football. So she jumps out of a window and lands on Mokhtar's scooter, which is a golden scooter. Unfortunately for the two, Mokhtar stole the scooter and was immediately arrested by the cops. And basically the song is going over this entire story. This was apparently very popular, had a music video and everything that you can actually find on YouTube. That is, looks hilariously incompetent. It has, unfortunately, some controversy associated with it. Now, as you could probably imagine, a white man depicting a North African immigrant is not going to play over very well. Worms ask, how dressed are we talking here? He basically dressed like kind of almost a stereotypical like Arabian chic. So, you know, like headdress and whatnot, long flowing robes. No blackface or anything like that. But needless to say, this depiction used apparently a stereotypical North African accent, and also depicted North Africans as being people who steal things, which is common stereotypes apparently in France. I don't know too much about the racial tensions between natural-born French citizens and North African immigrants, so I can't really speak too much of authority on this. But I did translate a lot of French articles into English about this, and apparently this song did attract a bit of controversy. Apparently not enough to really affect his career because he's still a presenter to this day. And he hasn't seemingly done anything too particularly controversial since then. I have no idea how to get up there, by the way. So, it's based upon this popular song, though, that Titus decided to make a video game about it, which is the game that we're playing now. At least this is the international version of it. It's quite strange that they, like, kind of made that choice, like making the choice of developing a game based upon a French comedian's popular, like, comedy song. Seems like just a very, very, I wouldn't say inspired choice, but certainly a very strange one. So, needless to say, that's sort of the story of this game. You can pick up the crates, but unfortunately the crates are above us, so I don't know if we can grab those. I'm gonna try to, though. So yeah, that's kind of the story of this game. Now, Titus the Fox himself is not going to star in any other video games. And as mentioned previously, this game is going to get a re-release on the Game Boy Color for one reason or another. But beyond that, Titus the Fox, other than being in the logo, is never really heard or spoken of ever again. Oh, okay, here we go. So this is what we have to do. We have to take this along with us. Interesting choice. As for how this game plays right now, first impressions aren't overly favorable. Graphically, it's quite nice. It's actually very, very clear. Very good use of the Game Boy Color palette. Everything smart of them to kind of do a white outline over all of the sprites to make them very clear and... Because, like, the backgrounds themselves are actually quite complicated. So this is a good way to just keep them nice and differentiated. Controls are inoffensive. It sort of doesn't make sense what items will affect what enemies. Some enemies, for instance, will take damage from bowling balls, or whatever those balls are, steel balls. But then others won't, but they'll take damage to crates. And of course, then there's just situations like that. I'm not sure if there's limited continues or anything like that either. Oh. Huh. Can we throw this through here? Because we can't carry this with us. Huh. And as far as I know, there's no, like, high jump. Oh, okay, there we go. I mean, this game apparently did very well from... Oh! There we go. That's just a nice little shortcut we found. Very, very nice. Very, very nice. I so far actually don't mind this game too much. Even if, yeah, like, it's maybe not the most, it's not the most robust platformer ever made, but it seems like it's something that... It's something that I wonder on the Game Boy screen if the complicated backgrounds and the complicated sprite would actually make this look like a mess, even though it's moving pretty slowly. Because you do have to keep in mind that the Game Boy's LCD screen had a very poor refresh rate. So any speed or any, like, quick changing of the pixels in the background would cause it to, like, look very smudgy. So I do really wonder how this would look on real hardware. It's always something that we're always going to miss out on with these games, is that we just don't really know how it ultimately is going to look. Like, how it truly would look on the original hardware. But yeah, this is not a game that I would have, like, really loved as a kid. But playing it now, it seems perfectly fine. It seems like a perfectly fine video game. The character of Titus is ridiculous, though. Titus definitely seems like he comes from a era of video game mascot. Like, you can clearly tell he comes from an era of, like, video game mascots that are, like, just trying to be rad to the max. But he definitely occupies that, like, Arrow the Acrobat tier of 90s video game mascot. So, like, how am I even supposed to get past him? I guess I'm just supposed to do that. Huh, okay, that works. Like, when it comes to, like, 90s video game mascots, I always think there was, like, 3 tiers. Like, your tier 1s are your, like, your Marios and Sonics. Tier 2's Bubsy. And then, like, tier 3 is, like, yeah, the Titus the Foxes, the Zero Kamikaze Squirrels, Arrow the Acrobats of the world. Gex. Oh, no, actually, Gex is solidly B tier. Gex is a solidly B tier character. We'll play a little bit more of this, and then we'll probably end up moving on here in a little bit, but... Worms of Can says, there's also the Madden tier. Madden is his own tier, and he deserves it. One thing I am going to give low points to is this music. This music is quite poor. Also, this does seem like a stage where, like, everything would blend together very, very poorly on the Game Boy's LCD screen, because they'd almost... Even playing on an HD monitor like this, like, the background almost... Like, it's the weird repeating pattern that's going on is, like, kind of, like, messing with my eyes and blending in a really weird way. Probably doesn't come across like that too appreciably to others, but it does to me. Oh, also ice physics on this. Okay, so that's not the exit, but the exit I bet you is probably right below us. I would actually really like to see this game running on original Amiga hardware. Because this game was originally developed for the Amiga line of computers, which were very, very popular in Europe. And we're actually pretty capable for 2D platforming games, if you really knew how to work the hardware well. So I'd be very, very interested to see how this actually ended up looking. Like, it did review well back in the day, in like British trade magazines and whatnot. Worms of Can says, can't wait for the Titus the Fox RPG reboot where he partners with a summoner named Yuna the Vixen. Neither can I. Neither can I. Alright, I think we maybe have seen enough of Titus the Fox. So, say goodbye to Titus, everybody. As we move on to our next video game, and maybe the one I'm the most excited about today. That's right! The hottest of bangers. Kirby's Dream Land. Yes, the first in the Kirby's Dream Land series. Well, the Kirby series, I guess is probably what we would call it. Developed by HAL Laboratory and published by Nintendo in August 1st, 1992. This is I think the first game on this entire list where we have an exact release date, which is quite nice. This is also, like I said, maybe the first unabashedly good game that we have played on this series. Let's go ahead and jump on in here. Paranormal says, hey, I think I've heard of this one. Yes, indeed, I think you might have. So, Kirby's Dream Land. Probably one of Nintendo's tentpole series nowadays, I would say. To kind of go into a bit of why this game is so important, let's start by talking about kind of early Game Boy history. So with the release of the Game Boy in 1989, Nintendo was like very much aware of the limitations the Game Boy possessed, and that was definitely reflected in games like Super Mario Land, with like how simple it looked, or the packing game Tetris, how it like was limited to like a single screen and whatnot to maybe not mess with the refresh rate of the LCD, as we've mentioned so many times already today. So, they're aware of all these limitations, you know, the limited color scheme, etc., etc. Limited controls, this only a 2-button system, if you don't count start and select. That it meant that any game developed for it had to be theoretically simple and deliberate, lest you run into the technical limitations the system had. Now, that being said, Nintendo needed games for this. And while aware of these limitations, they also wanted to push the boundaries as much as possible. Because they were also very much aware that, you know, simple can mean good, but simple could also have negative connotations as well. So with that, they put a call out to basically any and all studios they either owned or had close relationships with to develop games with the portable in mind, and, you know, to try to push these limits and figure out what they could do with this hardware. And one of these companies that rose to the task was HAL Laboratory, also known as just sometimes as HAL, or in its early days as Halkit. HAL is a very weird company, known for its close collaboration with Nintendo. Now, we have like 11 different HAL games that we're actually going to be playing for the Game Boy. They were a very, very prolific developer for the Game Boy. So we're not going to get too deeply into their backstory now, but we'll just kind of give like the short TLDR. TLDR, I actually should say. And kind of give like a just quick little backstory on them. So, HAL is an independent company that is known for its close collaboration with Nintendo. They're not owned by Nintendo at all. They have a similar relationship to Game Freak, the developers of the Pokemon games, in the sense of they are definitely free to publish for anybody else, but they just kind of choose not to. So, they are kind of commonly referred to as what could be called a second-party developer, which is not really a true thing, but it's something that a lot of video game enthusiasts will use to refer to this particular arrangement. Now, HAL has a very, very close relationship with Nintendo. A lot of cross-pollination between the two companies, despite being ostensibly independent. For instance, a lot of HAL staff works directly at Nintendo's headquarters in Kyoto, and a lot of employees have either worked for HAL, Nintendo, or both. Probably the most prominent example is, of course, going to be Satoru Iwata, who got his start out as a programmer for HAL, later became president at HAL, and then, of course, became president at Nintendo Japan. So, that's kind of the quick and dirty of HAL. We'll talk a little bit more about them when we get to a few of their other games. But how this relates to Kirby itself is, once again, the story goes out that Nintendo put out the call, let's make some games for the Game Boy. And HAL was like, sure, why not? They started taking pitches internally for Game Boy games. And one person who had an idea was a 19-year-old kid, essentially, a designer at HAL by the name of Masahiro Sakurai. Now, Sakurai is, I think nowadays, I think it's actually pretty terrible to call him kind of a legendary game designer at this point, for his work not only in the Kirby series, but on the Smash Bros. Series, as well as Kid Icarus as well. Or its later editions of Kid Icarus, to be very, very clear. At this time, though, he's just a 19-year-old designer. You know, pretty fresh-faced and whatnot. Now, the story goes is that he just kind of put out this idea of making a game that was based around inhaling and exhaling objects. And Worms of Can mentions that the Smash Bros. Series is just a Kirby series featuring many cameos. You're not wrong about that. Before we continue on Sakurai's history, I do want to point out this boss is Lo and La La La. This is a very direct reference to another HAL series called The Adventures of Lolo, also known as Agerman in Japan. A long-running series of games that's now defunct, but actually got its start on Japanese PCs, and later ended up getting releases on not only the Nintendo Entertainment System, but also the Game Boy. So eventually we'll play some Adventures of Lolo one of these days. So yeah, Sakurai's put out this idea. And management at HAL was impressed enough that they greenlit it and put him in charge of the entire project. This may seem like a very strange arrangement to put a 19-year-old in charge of developing the game and being the main director on it, but that's not uncommon for Japanese game development at this time. Shigeru Miyamoto, for instance, famously, was in charge of the original Donkey Kong. When he was a young lad, I think also 19 as well. Now, he and his team at HAL got started working on this game, and while they had definitely the main concept down, they had trouble kind of figuring out what the main character should be. Because what they needed to do, of course, was have something that was going to be very clearly legible on the Game Boy screen. Once again, Game Boy screen, a lot of limitations. But they had no idea exactly how to go about that. So what they did is that they decided to just put in a placeholder character, just this kind of like blobby looking thing, and start designing the game, and they figured they'll figure out the main character later. Well, it turns out that that little blob grew on the team, Sakurai included. And eventually they decided, hey, you know what? I think this character should be the main character. And so that's how Kirby ended up becoming the main character, or as he was known at the time, Popopo. So, this round-shaped blob, named Popopo, was depicted as being a pink blob, who was known for being kind of lazy, and actually not really being that big of a fan named Food. Big of a fan named Food, my oh my. English is a very strong language for me, as you can tell. Not being a big fan of Food, which is obviously very different from Kirby is nowadays. Now, the game started getting started under the title of Twinkle Popo, and there's some theories as to why this character was going to be called Popo in the first place. Popopo, I should say. One of them was because of the fact that the previous series, Adventures of Lolo, featured a character named Lolo, who's called Lolo in here, and his girlfriend's also featured, called La La La. So they figured it's kind of like nice alliteration. The main antagonist in this game is called King Dedede, or King Dedede, I should say, which is, also pretty similar to Popopo. But regardless, that name wasn't destined to be around forever. And so, eventually, he ended up getting renamed to Kirby. Now, there's a lot of rumors exactly how the name Kirby was selected. And for the longest time, nobody actually had a definitive answer for that. Now, the obvious thing was that this character was... The obvious rumor, I should say, was that this character was named after a lawyer by the name of John Kirby. Now, John Kirby was a lawyer who helped defend Nintendo during the case Universal Studios versus Nintendo, a 1982 case that kind of almost decided the fate of Nintendo in many ways, by proving that King Kong was in the public domain, allowing Nintendo to keep all of the royalty rights to Donkey Kong, which allowed him to, essentially keep more or less a small treasure of cash on hand, and allowed him to continue developing other games. Now, Nintendo obviously was very, very fond of John Kirby. They literally gifted him a yacht by the name of... or a sailboat, I think. I don't think it was quite a yacht, by the name of Donkey Kong. And so naturally, when this character was named Kirby, kind of an odd name for a character, it seemed very natural to say, okay, well, he was named after John Kirby. So, according to an interview done in 2011 with Shigeru Miyamoto, the legendary Nintendo designer, he mentions that that was not quite the case. So, the way he tells the story is that Kirby was not named Kirby because of John Kirby. Rather, they were given a list of names and Kirby happened to be on there. And Miyamoto liked the name Kirby because Kirby is a very sharp-sounding name, right? But as you can see from the character, he's very round and cute. And Miyamoto liked that juxtaposition of this sharp-sounding name with this soft-looking character. Now, later on in the interview, though, he also says that he saw the name Kirby and thought about John Kirby. And was pretty fond of the lawyer, and he said, well, it did play a little bit of a part in naming the character Kirby. So I guess the answer actually is kind of a yes and no. He was named after John Kirby, and also not. J-Spot says, I always figured he was named after the vacuum cleaner since he sucks up enemies. Honestly, that would make sense. But no, he actually was not. So, regardless, Kirby now has a name. And now, a game is being actively development under the title Hoshi no Kirby, also known as Kirby to the Stars. And this name's actually going to stick. Also, shoutouts to Krako here, who's kind of bodying me right now. So, the development of the game was apparently quite odd, as told by Masahiro Sakurai. So the development of the game was started not on like a Game Boy dev kit, but rather a twin Famicom. The twin Famicom being a combination Famicom and Famicom disk system. And I'm just not really sure why they decided to do this. But on top of that, they also didn't like use stuff like keyboards or like mice. What they did is they used a trackball that was attached to it, and they programmed all the values into the game using a trackball and an on-screen keyboard. Which sounds like it was a very, very slow process. Now, Sakurai commented on this in an interview he gave before a Kirby 25th anniversary music concert. And he's like, well, this is just kind of how we thought video game development was done at the time. You know, I was kind of new at this. And, like, he further mentions that, he compared it to, like, making lunch inside of a lunchbox, or, like, using a lunchbox to make lunch. And that, yeah, it kind of doesn't make sense to do it that way, but that's just sort of how they did it. So, quite silly, but, you know, that's how these things work, right? Is there anything down here? No. So regardless, this did seem to work out well for them. They actually credit for how, like, well this game runs, as well as how, like, compact a lot of the, compact the graphics are and how well coded this game is, based upon using the twin Famicom to develop. They don't really go into specifics, they being Sakurai or any of the members of the team that worked on this, but that's how the story goes anyways. Now, this game ended up being released in 1992, and it got released to favorable reviews. I wouldn't say critical acclaim, because really kind of no Game Boy game really got released to critical acclaim. Also, fun fact, you can fly into this moon and go to a secret area. A common Kirby secret or Easter egg. You ever see a moon in a Kirby game? Always fly into it. So yeah, this game ended up getting released, and it was a massive success for HAL. This game sold by, I think the first 2 years, ended up selling roughly about 1 million copies. And by 1997, 5 years after the game released, according to some sources I read, it sold around 4.6 million copies. It was by far HAL's most successful game at the time. And I think even by 1997, it still was HAL's most successful game. So, needless to say, it inspired 2 more sequels that came out. Kirby's Adventure in 1993 for the NES, and Kirby's Pinball for the Game Boy, which, of course, we're going to play, and is a great game. I love Kirby's Pinball. And, of course, it got a series started that is arguably one of Nintendo's pillars. Like, many people refer to Mario, Zelda, and Metroid as being the 3 pillars of Nintendo. I would actually argue that it's probably Mario, Zelda, and Kirby. Kirby's had incredible success, over 30 games released. An anime that was actually quite successful, at least in Japan. And, yeah, just overall, it's one of my... Kirby is my favorite video game character. And Kirby is one of my favorite video game series of all time. So, yeah. And often, it would be... Kirby's going to be used for weird experimental games. Like, as we'll actually see with Kirby's Block Ball, or Kirby's Pinball, or Kirby's Star Stacker, or Kirby's Tilt and Tumble and whatnot. So yeah, absolutely fantastic game. Absolutely, absolutely love it. Very short, though, as you can see, because we're already at the final stage. Also, King Dedede's theme, always a banger. Even on the Game Boy sound chip. So now she's gotta refight all the bosses. Oh yeah, you gotta go through like shortened versions of the stages as well. So one thing to talk about with this game as well is that... Okay, I do have to mention this. 127 Crazy says the true 3 pillars of Nintendo are Electroplanking, Clu Clu Land, and Chibi Robo. Which, you're right, how dare I? Also, we should talk about this first boss here, Wispy Woods. Wispy Woods is a boss or enemy in virtually every Kirby game. Even the weird puzzle games that end up being released. In fact, it'd probably be easier to talk about all the Kirby games that don't feature Wispy Woods, or some variation of Wispy Woods, than it would be to talk about all the games that feature him. But he's a very, very popular character that is always present in Kirby games. The reason Worf says it also should be 4 pillars of Pokemon. The reason why I don't include Pokemon is because Pokemon is not wholly owned by Nintendo. Pokemon has a bit of a weird lineage within Nintendo. Although, to be fair, Kirby also kind of does as well, ever since the anime was released. But that's something we're going to talk about in a when we play probably Kirby's Block Ball or something. So yeah, this game... Apologies, let me just take a quick drink. So this game actually got a quasi-remake of sorts in 1995 with the release of Kirby Superstar. Kirby Superstar being a really, really cool thing. It's essentially a package of 8... These call it games, but they're really modes. They all have their different twists and whatnot. Absolutely wonderful game. And one of those games, the very first game actually you can play, is a game called Spring Breeze, which is a quasi-remake of this game. It's shortened considerably. Some of the levels are pretty vastly changed to accommodate for some powers from on here, like this Mint Leaf. The Mint Leaf allows Kirby to fly and just shoot out pockets of air. And so, that's just simply not present in Kirby Superstar. It is in Kirby Superstar's remake, Kirby Superstar Ultra, oddly enough, but that's a story for another time. But yeah, so they ended up sort of like remaking this in a way, but they actually have not remade it since. Another thing to mention about Kirby, also this is the one instance where you can't fly into a moon. So, another thing to mention about Kirby is that people are well aware of Kirby's slate of abilities. Specifically, Kirby can suck up enemies and copy their abilities. That's obviously not possible here. Unfortunately, we cannot eat this Waddle Dee and get his Parasol power, or eat this Waddle Doo and get the Beam ability. That's not something that's going to happen until Kirby's Adventure. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is they just didn't really think about that until Kirby's Adventure. And the second is because, well, they kind of had to cut a lot of things from Kirby's Dreamland in the first place. For instance, Kirby was supposed to be able to inhale multiple enemies at once and have a stronger, like, exhale shot, which is something that's actually not even present in this. Finally, probably the last real thing to mention about Kirby right here and now is Kirby's color. From you can see on the box art, that should be on screen right now. My notes are kind of covering the box, so hopefully it's there. If it's not, that's embarrassing. It is, great. Had to check. One thing you'll probably notice is that Kirby is depicted as being white there. But Kirby is traditionally a character who's pink. Now, the reason for this is simple. Nintendo of America just depicted him as monochrome because that's how he appears in-game. So that's part of the reason why they did that. Oh my god, I'm getting bodied by King DDD. In a lot of initial artwork, though, he is depicted as pink, and that's what Masahiro Sakurai intended for the character. The character is always intended to be pink. Now, there's a story that's kind of apocryphal that Miyamoto wanted the character to be yellow instead. That's not quite true. The truth is that he also saw black and white images of Kirby, and in his mind, he just thought the character was yellow. So when he was like, later saw artwork that he was pink, he was like, oh, huh, that's kind of funny. Now, Kirby is often depicted as yellow in games where like Kirby's like a second player, and it's a pretty common alternate color, alongside the colors red and green as well. So that still lived on in many ways. So yeah, now we're facing off against the final boss of this game, King DDD. King DDD. This is like really the only game where he's like truly an antagonist. After this game, he's actually going to be Kirby's friend. He's the kind of sort of ruler of Dreamland, except not really. Nobody really follows his orders. He just happens to have a castle, and he's just a self-styled king. But the story goes in this is that he stole all the food in Dreamland. And so Kirby goes and get it back from him. Most other games, he actually ends up being Kirby's friend, and usually just gets possessed by some sort of malevolent spirit or whatnot. And Kirby needs to, you know, basically hit him in the face a lot until he stops being evil. But yeah, that's Kirby's Dream Land. We just beat it. Very short game. Kind of disappointing in a way. I know I was disappointed when I actually beat this game as a kid, because it is pretty easy and it is pretty short. But it is a very charming title nonetheless. P-Bug says, now beat the hard mode. Yes, there's actually a hard mode in this game, and it actually is legitimately hard. Yes, and there's, of course, Masahiro Sakurai. Of course, name, This is still the era of some pseudonyms here, so as you can see, Sunny Rain. Great name. Great name. I think I beat it as a kid, the hard mode, but it is very, very difficult. Yeah, a lot of musical motifs in this are reused in further Kirby games. Yeah, wonderful game. I love it. And so many players. Thank you, so many players. Yeah, this is the start of a wonderful series. And we're going to definitely be playing more games of this. We have 5 Kirby games to get through throughout this entire series. But of course, let's watch the ending before we move on. Bye-bye. Yeah, but if you press up A and select on the title screen to start a new adventure. You know what? Let's go ahead and take a look at that extra game. If I remember correctly, this will stay forever. You'll just get to see King DDD being angry for, like... Well, I guess he does run off eventually now, doesn't he? Here, let's just do a hard reset. Let's just check that out real quick. Alright! So, the main differences here are there are more enemies, they move quicker. Some new enemies, too, although they're really more recolors. Okay, well, that's a new enemy. I think there's, like, less health items overall. And a lot of enemies are also replaced by Gordos. Gordos being the invincible little sea urchin-looking creatures. Okay, let's play through the first stage, and then we'll go ahead and move on. Just so we can highlight some of these differences. I'd like to say, yeah, he does. Poppy here, oh yeah, Poppy has also just new moves and whatnot. So yeah, they kind of go above and beyond by giving like bosses different patterns and whatnot. So yeah, very, very different. Far more than you would honestly expect from this game, which is good. Because it does add some decent replayability. But as you can see, we're kind of getting bodied here. That didn't go well. We have to fight... I think we have to refight Poppy. We don't. We don't. Okay. But yeah, I remember beating this extra mode as a kid. I think you get told about the debug menu? The debug menu code, which allows you to listen to like sound effects and whatnot. If you happen to successfully beat this. I think it's down, select, and B. I would like to say. Maybe we'll test that out. Maybe we'll hard reset to see if that's correct. But yeah. Yeah, I absolutely love Kirby. I could honestly talk about Kirby forever. I really, really could. But let's go and say hi to Wispy Woods and move on. Because Wispy gets pretty tough, if I remember correctly, because he drops Gordos as well. Yep. And also, yeah, it kind of goes crazy with those Air Blast. Although if you stand right next to him, he can't hit you. Yeah, OG Dreamland is a perfectly fun game. Like, it's a very simple mechanic. Just, hey, inhale enemies and shoot them back, but works out pretty well. Let's see, maybe you get a different dance, too. No, I don't believe you actually do. Yeah. I'm just gonna hard reset because I just actually want to see if that code is correct. It is. Okay. Yeah, and so you can do things like you can select how much health you have. That's like max health, by the way. How many Kirbys you have, and of course, sound test. I think that is the game over theme, by the way. But yeah. That's Kirby's Dream Land. Wonderful, wonderful game. Go ahead and move on to our next game. A game that's not nearly as good, unfortunately. But, you know, it's interesting in its own right. This is NFL Quarterback Club. Published by LJN and developed by Beam Software for the Game Boy. And released in 1993. I can feel everybody leaving right now. It would not be a Game Boy-A-Thon if we did not play at least one sports game, because they released way too many sports games for the Game Boy. A system that could not handle sports games. So this game, though, is actually quite interesting. To start, it is the first game in the NFL Quarterback Club series. A football franchise that would see life on the Super Nintendo, Genesis, PlayStation, Saturn consoles before becoming more or less exclusively released for the Nintendo 64, and then later would be like on the Dreamcast and whatnot. We have a couple more quarterback games in our future on this console to play, or console, this portable to play. So we'll talk about its gaming history then, like its entire series history. But in short, it's going to become one of the main competitors to EA's Madden series, alongside Sega's own NFL series called NFL. So I want to talk about this game specifically. Now, this game is called NFL Quarterback Club. Yeah. It's based upon the NFL Quarterback Challenge, though. Although now I have to look, yeah, because it is called Quarterback Club. Okay. But yeah, it's based upon something called the NFL Quarterback Challenge. Mm-hmm. You're correct. But the box art states it's NFL Quarterback Club. Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? And the reason being is because it's based primarily off of the NFL Quarterback Challenge. Now, let's talk about this game real quick, what exactly it is. You see, it's not a traditional football game, where two teams of like 11 line up and you select plays and whatnot. Instead, the developers of Beam Software decided to go for much different and I think smarter tact. They decided to hyper-focus on one aspect of football, specifically, once again, the NFL Quarterback Challenge. Now, the NFL Quarterback Challenge was a series of challenges that was balled up into this competition that was held between 1990 and 2007. It involved various quarterbacks from the NFL teams, with the idea that these players would participate in drills to test their effectiveness at various tasks important to being a quarterback, such as accuracy, speed and mobility, how far you can throw the ball, and how quickly can you recognize where you need to throw. In fact, let's go ahead and jump into one of these and kind of check out a few of these different modes. Now, this game only features a few quarterbacks here. We have Jeff Hostetler of the LA Raiders, Phil Simms of the New York Giants, Steve Young of the San Francisco 49ers. Ignore the fact that San Francisco is misspelled. Don't worry about that. Mark Ripon of the Washington... Well, we're not going to say that last one. Boomer Esiason of the New York Jets. It was a different time back then. Bernie Kosar of the Cleveland Browns. John Elway of the Denver Broncos. Warren Moon of the Houston Oilers. I love this scrolling back and forth left and right. They couldn't think of just making the text a little bit smaller to fit everything on screen. Jim Everett of Los Angeles Rams. Randall Cunningham of the Philadelphia Eagles. Jim Harbaugh of the Chicago Bears. I also like how every picture of Jim Harbaugh, he just looks as angry as possible. Yeah, I'm not sure if all these stats are true, to be honest. Because I don't think Troy Aikman's actually 6'4". But yeah, Troy Aikman of the Dallas Cowboys and Jim Kelly of the Buffalo Bills. Like, I think Jim Kelly is shorter than 6'3". Yeah, I actually questioned some of these particular particular stats, but Perry Normal says, gonna do a ROM hack of this with all the names for the Key and Peele college football skit? Yes, please. You should. So what this is it's essentially a series of mini games. And with controls that are, let's call them not the best. So the idea is you are trying, of course, to kind of hit these targets here, the accuracy competition. The distance is not exactly well represented. I think each line represents like a line on the football field. Like that kind of is how you judge distance. How do you judge accuracy? I'm not really certain about that one, because I think that's going to throw pretty far to the left. Yeah. So I think it's like the farthest distance, like if you're in the middle from that farthest distance, then that's going to go like midway. If you're like far to the left or far to the right, well, you saw what happened. It'll either go far to the left or far to the right. We got 2 points, so we did great. Oh, interesting. We get to see the computer do this. Well, you know, that works for me. So yeah, like, this challenge was really strange. As I mentioned, held between 1990 and 2007, involved various quarterbacks and whatnot, and the competition was created by a group called the Challenge Group. The Challenge Group I could find absolutely nothing about, mostly because it was an LLC, and there's about 1 million different groups that are some variation of Challenge Group out there that are either defunct or still active. So I presume they're belly up at this point, though. I cannot imagine they still exist. Let's try speed and mobility real quick. And we're going to go with the fastest quarterback I know of. And that's going to be kind of, at this point, old man Bernie Kosar. Did I accidentally select 6 or something? Whatever. Okay. Oh no, okay, so... Alright. Okay, that's a foul. Well, I guess I have to run that direction. That's a foul, so we have to go down this way. I don't know how to jump. Player disqualified. Alright, let's try again. You got this, Troy Aikman. Troy Aikman, famous for his agility, by the way. The game really... Okay, there we go. You have to run at an angle. Yeah! This is quite terrible. So getting back to the quarterback challenge. The challenge group put this event on, and it was sponsored by DirecTV. The competition itself was held on the island of Kauai on the Hawaii Islands. And would usually air around every May or so. Oftentimes, it would be broadcast on ESPN. And the competition, once again, itself would air until 2007. And yeah, it would feature these different challenges, have banter between the different quarterbacks. I don't know exactly what they would win other than some sort of cash prize. And I guess the prestige of being the quarterback who could throw it at a target real good. So, good on them, I guess. I threw 0 distance. 0 distance. Jim Harbaugh won. We're gonna try that one again. We're gonna try that one again. We're gonna put it on easy too. All right. I think what we need to do is... Oh, it's alternate. You have to alternate. Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha. Alternate A and B. Oh, boy. You gotta alternate pretty fast, too. 28! Alright. That was easy, by the way. I'm gonna try that one more time. So, the competition itself aired until 2007, when it was just kind of unceremoniously canceled for reasons that were... Yeah, you gotta really hit that hard. I have no idea how you're even supposed to do that. Yeah, just eventually in 2007, I think less and less quarterbacks actually wanted to do it, because, like, the list of quarterbacks who won and were part of the competition gets less and less prestigious. Like, from, like, 1990 to 2000, you get some pretty big names, like Brett Favre and whatnot, you know, Steve Young, etc., etc. But then by 2007, it was like Chris Sims and other backup quarterbacks were participating in this. There was one edition also that didn't air. I believe it was the 2007 edition, which was unfortunate because that's the last one. Because this was shortly after Michael Vick got arrested and convicted of animal cruelty charges and illegal dogfighting. He was a part of the competition, so they just chose not to air it. So, with that, it just unceremoniously ended. So, for one reason or another, Acclaim decided, and by Acclaim I mean LJN, who was a subsidiary of Acclaim at this time, decided that they were going to go ahead and make a football game. So they acquired the license to the QB challenge and decided to make a game called NFL Quarterback Club. So this got released in 1993, and like it makes perfect sense for the Game Boy. Like it's just these like simple like mini games essentially. Why did that get thrown to the right? I don't understand. And so yeah, you know, ended up being like this. It kind of makes perfect sense for why this game exists, right? Now, the kind of unfortunate thing is it's still a bad game. This game's not good at all. These are not well thought out minigames, and it's very, very slight, as you can tell. Just having 4 different minigames that all range from difficult to outright impossible. So, Maybe not exactly the best idea overall, but you can see why they decided to do this for the Game Boy. Now, the series would take a year off after this. There would be nothing in 1994, but in 95, a new edition of NFL Quarterback Club would be released, but this time it would be a full-on 11-on-11 football game. That actually would still keep these minigame challenges, at least for the first couple of editions after this. But we'll talk about that more when we get to the kind of oddly titled NFL Quarterback Club 2 at some point. And with that, I think I don't want to play this game anymore. So let's go ahead and move on to our final game today. And maybe the weirdest? It's Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. And when I saw this, I was like, why? Also, yes, this is a hot banger from THQ. A company that's known for quality during this era. And one that we're going to be talking about at length when we get to another game that has a little less to talk about than Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. So, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, publisher THQ once again. Developed by Equilibrium, which I think we played one of their games previously. Probably some other licensed game, I'm sure. But we have played one of their other games on here so far. Published in 1992. Now, anybody who knows anything about Attack of the Killer Tomatoes might think that this is a bit of an odd choice. And you would not be wrong. It's involves a story of, obviously, you can see Dr. Gangrene has begun his assault in the world, beginning with San Zucchini, using killer tomatoes in order to devastate different cities and whatnot. It's a very, very weird thing. Now, this game is weird in the sense that this was at the height of licensed video games, or at least games based upon movies, comic books, TV shows, and the like. Also, fun fact, this is another one of those games that uses B to jump and A to attack. Your attacks are various kicks, unless you hold up and A, in which case you punch. It's very, very silly. Now, some of these licensed games make sense, right? Like, for instance, a game about Jurassic Park that's released like a year, the year it's released, or like a year afterwards, makes perfect sense to do a licensed game of this. Now, occasionally, though, it seems like they've run out of properties, and then they decide to do something strange. And they go, well, why don't we just license something else and just put out a game about it? And this is really emphasized by Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. So, first off, this game runs terribly. This is a terribly running game. Oh my god. I hope you like your frame rates in the teens. Also, that tomato's like, you're not leaving this stage. How dare you? Let's try that again. How do you leave the stage? I'm not sure how you're actually supposed to leave the stage. I hope this is like a weird anti-piracy thing, and I'm just not aware of it. Oh, you're probably right, yeah, because I took a glitch while... Yeah. Okay, let's die and see if we can't just reset this. So, let's talk about Attack of the Killer Tomatoes and what this even is. So Attack of the Killer Tomatoes was a 1978 film. That's exactly what you think it is. It's a movie about killer tomatoes. Asked and answered, right? Show's over, folks. Except it's actually... Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is a very interesting movie. You see, it was made intentionally as a spoof of horror movies at the time, as well as just suspense thrillers like Albert Hitchcock's The Birds. Like, in fact, the opening crawl to Attack of the Killer Tomatoes just directly references The Birds, if I remember correctly. Or at least marketing does. It's one or the other. So, it tells the story of the Great Tomato War. Now, the Great Tomato War is where, out of nowhere, a bunch of tomatoes just become kind of sentient and begin to eat or just kill humanity. Just out of nowhere. Now, this obviously sounds horrifying, but, you know, they kill them at least in some funny and bizarre ways. Like, somebody, like, drinks a can of tomato juice, and, like, it turns out that the tomato juice is sentient, and so it kills them on the inside. And, like, stuff like that. Now, eventually the military is called in to deal with the tomato menace, only to be left in shambles, because guns don't work against tomatoes, as it turns out. And all seems absolutely lost, as tomatoes begin to depopulate cities, when it's discovered that the tomatoes shrink when they hear the lyrics of the song Puberty Love. Not a real song as far as I know, made up for the movie. And so, with that, the great tomatoes are defeated. Because they hear the song, they shrink, they get squashed, and with that, humanity is saved. Unlike us. I wonder if there's something we're supposed to grab. Like, we have to... Oh, I think we have to kill all the tomatoes. Also, we have a parachute. That's cool, I guess. So this is obviously a terrible movie. It had cult status for being a bad movie. And... well, maybe. I have no idea. Do we have to kill all the tomatoes? It's not clear to me. Nothing about this game is clear. So, kind of a terrible movie, but it's interesting in the sense that it's one of the first movie spoofs. Like, this actually predates Airplane by about, what, two years or so? I believe Airplane was 1978? And to be fair, it was profitable. It was a profitable movie for them. It was made on a $100,000 budget, and it earned $500,000. So, hey, five-fold increase. Good job. Now, that should be the end of it. Like, we should not be talking about Attack of the Killer Tomatoes at all. Past this, but, it turns out, no. No, it's not done. So, how did we get to having a game about Attack of the Killer Tomatoes? Well, it turns out, this game is not based upon the movie. But rather, it's based upon the greater franchise as a whole, because it turns out in 1986, something rather strange is going to happen. Have you all heard of the show The Muppet Babies? Muppet Babies is a great show. A very popular show, too. Okay, so we had to get a can of tomato juice, and that's how we got out. We learned it. We learned how. So, in 1986, the show The Muppet Babies, a show that ran for 8 seasons, an animated show that's a spin-off of the Muppet Show, it had an episode that had a skit where Fozzie Bear basically parodies Attack of the Killer Tomatoes in something called Attack of the Silly Tomatoes. Now, this episode apparently did very well for them. It was apparently one of the highest rated episodes of the season. Now, that should not mean anything, except, well, it did, because this resulted in a company called New World Pictures approaching Foursquare Productions. Foursquare Productions being the production company that helped fund and had the rights to Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. They approached them and said, hey, this episode did very well, we should make a sequel to Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Which is stupid. That's absolutely stupid. But they agreed to do this. And so, they made Return of the Killer Tomatoes, released in 1986. And it was, well, it was successful. It was made on a budget, apparently, of $1 million, and it earned $5 million. Apparently, if you make a Killer Tomatoes movie, you're guaranteed to earn at least 5 times the amount you put into it. Oh no, the scientists beat us. I'm not sure if I really want to, but we still have more to talk about when it comes to Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, so I guess we will. I pressed the wrong button. So I hope you like the first stage again. So 2 more movies actually came out after this. The Tomatoes Strike Back in 1990, which stars George Clooney, by the way. It's one of George Clooney's first roles in a major, well, major motion picture. So, that's fun. Get on, George Clooney. So, you know, that happened. He ended up, you know, having a... He ended up starring in that. And then, like, after that was Killer Tomatoes Eat France, which came out in 1991. Gamakuma says, always neat to see where big stars got to start. Yeah, it always is. It always is. So these 2 movies, I don't know how well they did, but, you know, not well enough to make a 5th Tomatoes movie, apparently. But it doesn't end there. Oh, yeah, I remember that, Kuma. Kuma says, I'm a big fan of Nightmare on Elm Street, Johnny Depp connection. He gets eaten by his bed. Yeah, I saw that as a kid, and it actually messed me up for a while. I refused to sleep in the middle of my bed for the longest time. So, this should be the end of the story, except for some reason, they decided to make an animated show based on Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Called, well, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. That ran for 2 seasons on Fox. As part of their children's programming block. Now, this tells the story of Chad Finletter, who is the nephew of the protagonist, who we're actually playing as here. I think his name is Harry Finletter. And it tells the story of how he battles against the evil scientist, Putrid T. Gangrene, as he tries to use the tomatoes to take over the world. Now, this story is very, very silly, because literally in the first episode, Chad gets a bunch of sidekicks after Putrid T. Gangrene basically, like, does experiments on these tomatoes and accidentally makes, first off, a human teenage girl, who's apparently a tomato, and a fuzzy tomato that gets passed off as a dog. And with that... Oh, I did not get the canned tomato sauce. I need to go back. And they just do their battles against Putrid T. Gangrene and his army of minions. From what little I've seen of this show, it seems terrible. It seems absolutely awful. But, it also has continuity. Second season, Putrid T. Gangrene actually wins. And then they have to team up against, like even more evil tomatoes. It sounds absolutely awful. Can I call down this? No, you cannot. J-Spot says, they made some really weird Saturday morning animation cartoons. Back in the day, Killer Tomatoes isn't even the weirdest property to get that treatment. That is agreed. I would agree with you on that. It is by far not the weirdest. But it is still very weird regardless. So yeah, that's kind of... So this game, yeah, is essentially based upon the cartoon. Like, a weird amalgam of the movies in the cartoon, because it stars the protagonists of the movies, yet features the villains from the cartoon. So, you know. Oh, hey, we've got a rad skateboard. That's cool. So that's kind of neat. Now, as far as how this game plays, the answer is terribly. Which I'm sure is of no surprise at all. It, first off, runs terribly. When there's no action on the screen, the game runs probably too fast for the Game Boy. Like, it looks like it would be kind of a blurry mess, to be honest. And when there's any sort of action on screen, it slows to a crawl. It seems like all of these items here are sprite. Yeah, there's those sprites, which the Game Boy can only handle so many sprites on screen at once. A lot of times, like, games around this time for the Game Boy would get around this by making them background elements. And just have the background change when you would, like, run over them. Apparently, the people who made Attack of the Killer Tomatoes decided that was not a good idea. And, I hate to tell them this, that was a mistake. So because of that, whenever there's anything on screen, it drops to a frame rate that is unacceptably slow. Like, I couldn't tell you what the exact frame rate of this is, but it definitely seems like it's like sub 15 frames per second. And it's very inconsistent, too. I saw that Gumakuma in the chat mention that it kind of is making his head spin, and I agree. This does not look good. Like, the only good thing I would say about this is that this slow speed would probably play okay on the Game Boy's, you know, low refresh rate LCD. Oh, the controls are terrible. It's B button to jump for some reason, A button to attack, and, like, they're sluggish, too. Like, there's a delay in turning around. And the controls are also just... They're probably explained in the manual. Like, you know, we don't have a manual, so I'm not gonna really blame this game too much for these control design options, but the jump, for instance, you get different jump heights the more you jump in place. But it's also inconsistent. Like, we're already jumping max height, but sometimes you don't. And then you have to jump multiple times in order to get up to max height. It's very, very strange. It also commits a cardinal sin of side-scrollers by having the scrolling action be offset, but be offset in a way where your player character is all the way forward. I did not get the tomato can. By having, yeah, so, like, as you move forward, as you can see, your protagonist is all the way to the right, which means you have limited reaction time for when enemies pop up and run into you. This is terrible. This is a terrible idea. It would be better to keep it either centered or do what some games did and actually have you completely to, like, the far side of the opposite side of the screen. Which they sort of do here. If you stand still, it actually gives you more real estate to the front. I don't know why they decided to make that choice. It's very, very strange. But yeah, it just makes for a game that's just not good at all, unfortunately. I think graphically this game looks fine. I think it's relatively inoffensive. I think it actually makes decent use of the screen real estate. Like, nothing is too big, for instance. It just has some very, very silly design ideas that I don't think are good. And see, there's the RNG in action for the jumps. I also don't think the music's particularly offensive. The title screen theme plays a Game Boy rendition of the Attack of the Killer Tomatoes theme. But, yeah. Honestly, this is just how a lot of Equilibrium and just THQ published games kind of were back in the day. They just... very, like, lowest common denominator sort of video games as far as, like, how they played. So it's maybe not a huge shock that it plays the way it does. Actually, it might be a secret that's behind us. We're going to try to find that secret before we quit playing this game, because I'm not sure if I have much more to say about this. Yeah. I would say, actually, this might be our first truly abysmal game we've played here. Like, Felix the Cat, for instance, was, like, a pretty good licensed game. Like, I actually really, really liked that. And, like, I'm not going to sit here and say, like, Quarterback Club is good. But it at least had ideas. I just wasted that. We're gonna die really quickly. Because I wanna see if there's a secret over to our left. Here. I like how I easily die in this game, but when I try to die, it's absolutely impossible. But yeah, we were bound to run into just a truly, truly bad game. And I'm glad it was Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. It would have been Jeopardy this week, but once again, we're not quite playing Jeopardy yet. But we will soon. Alright, yeah! Look at these secrets. Look at these bouncy clouds. Apparently that's the only secret on here. Actually, before we quit, I'm actually very curious to see if there's any cheat codes for this. So, let's actually close this real quick. Or actually just configure something real quick. And I'm going to look up one thing real quick before we close out for the day. Alright, GameFAQs, tell me... No, I don't want the NES version. Give me that Game Boy version. There is! Ooh, okay. Let's go ahead and enter this code. I'm very curious as to what this code is. Okay, I just gotta do one thing very quickly. I apologize about that. Let's go ahead and reset this game. All right. At the title screen, hold select up and press BBA. All right. Select up, BBA. Title screen's music and animation will stop to confirm the correct entry, and the following button keys will now be available. Press A. The amount times correspond to the desired level number. And then press B for invulnerability. Yep, we'll do that. Let's go to stage 5. Yeah, so we're on stage 5 and now we're invincible. Apparently invincibility is just constantly flashing, by the way. Remember when cheat codes existed? That was cool. Apparently there's also another code to see the developers as well, but this only works on the US version of the game, not the Japanese version. Which is slightly strange. Not completely strange if you know anything about a Japanese aversion to having credits in their games, although this is... I don't see why that would necessarily matter in this game. Just from the fact that this is the main theme to Attack of Killer Tomatoes, I'm wondering if this is the end of the game. Let's find out, shall we? And by find out, I mean let's... Okay, there we go. Good. Yeah, let's cheat and beat Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Oh god, we're not near the end. Okay, never mind. Well, let's do one last thing. Let's just look at the credits. And then I think we'll go ahead and call it a stream. So apparently just the B button. Yeah, programmed by Dan Miller, Curtis Norris. Oh, Amy Bramberger. Yeah, song by John DeBello. John DeBello, I believe, was the writer and creator of Attack of Killer Tomatoes. So yeah, there you go. That's who made this game. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Pretty interesting trip down memory lane and whatnot with Kirby, and I think we learned a lot about some very interesting games today. You know, interesting things about French comedians, old movies, and the like. So remember that you can find additional episodes on my YouTube channel, which I should really... Well, I'm actually redesigning this interface to actually include all those links and whatnot, so look forward to that. Each episode is uploaded 1 week after it's recorded on Twitch. So if you need to see older episodes, you can go there and check that out. As far as what we have next time, our next 4 games are going to be Roger Clemens, MVP Baseball. Which, good news, that's going to be the last time we're playing a baseball game in the stream for a little bit. 5 streams in a row with at least one sports game. It's kind of ridiculous. So Roger Clemens MVP baseball, Dick Tracy, Radar Mission, and Cliffhanger. But that's going to be next Thursday. Thanks for joining me, everyone, and take care.